Welcome back to another episode of the Fireside PM podcast. I've got a fun topic in today's episode, and I'm calling it the candidate's dilemma. You all probably remember when the game theory kind of publication around the prisoner's dilemma was a big thing. This is like a version of that, but instead of two prisoners trying to figure out if they should confess their crime to the police. This one is, what should employers and job candidates reveal about themselves when they're in that kind of delicate courting/matchmaking process? So let's walk through the 2x2 here. On the vertical axis, you have high employer transparency, meaning the hiring manager or company that's recruiting you is going to be super open about what's great, but also what's not great, what they need, where they've struggled, what their values are, how they make decisions, how they feel about the team, the business, why this role exists, what's success for it. So if they're super open about that, they would be in the kind of upper hemisphere. And then on the vertical axis on the bottom, it would be lower employer transparency. That's where maybe it's only the good stuff, or they're not really revealing a whole lot about the role, the job. It's not always a bad thing. I actually remember back in 2006, when I first joined Google back then, at that point, they wouldn't even tell you what you would be working on. It was like joining the army, and they would just kind of say like, all right, first we'll decide if you're Google PM material, and then we'll tell you what you're going to work on after you've accepted. So it's not always like a company's like terrible that isn't transparent. But there are companies where, maybe they don't know what what their issues are, or they kind of know, but they don't want to scare you off, or they really, in their heart of hearts, think that they've got it figured out, and they don't really want to kind of show you all of their dirty laundry, if you will. So that's the vertical axis. And then on the horizontal axis, if we go all the way to the right, you have high candidate transparency. That's where the job candidate is basically saying like, look, this is what I'm great at. This is where I'm not as great. This is the kind of stuff I love to do. This is the kind of stuff I've struggled with, or I just don't enjoy doing it. Or these are the types of values I have, or here's a time where I was really happy, but here's a time where it was really difficult. Many candidates are leery of kind of putting it all out there because, they're trying to get an offer. Sometimes, that's the primary objective. Not always, but generally, they want to successfully maybe negotiate a very good comp package. So they may not reveal all of their limitations or anything that could jeopardize their kind of negotiating power. And then on the left-hand side, on the horizontal axis, you have lower candidate transparency. That's where the candidate will just be pure sales mode. Like, I'm great. I can do everything. You guys are the perfect company for me. Oh, I've done that a million times. I know all about this, that, and the other. So what happens when you have these different permutations? Well, we'll start at the Northeast quadrant, generally the kind of favorite place. When there's high employer transparency and high candidate transparency, it generally does result in good outcomes. I've summarized this as like, this is like the equivalent of a very long dating process that eventually, ends up with living together or marriage, and you're totally kind of getting to know each other, all the good, bad, and ugly. And it does result when you do have a match those matches are really strong because there's not many surprises afterwards. And both sides will have had maximum information to make the joint determination if the match is good or not. Now, if you go to the left on the northwest quadrant, that's where you have high employer transparency, but lower candidate transparency. So the employer is being super open about what's working, what isn't, why this role has been difficult to fill, or why people in the past have not been able to fulfill some of the expectations of the role, or why they created this role, like what problem they're solving, what's working, what isn't, challenges they've had on the culture side, whatever it is. Like, they're super transparent. But the candidate is mainly in like, oh, okay, I'm going to write down and get all this information. Now I'm just going to share with you all the positive things that convince you that I'm the best person for the job. This is not like always the best outcome, because this is summarized as like, hey, this is like the bachelor or bachelorette kind of playing the field. The candidate is just taking information and they're only kind of sharing positive stuff about themselves. But the hiring manager and the employer is being very open. Now, you might think like, oh, well, this is terrible for the employer. Like, they shouldn't do this. Well, yes and no. Like, it still might be in their interest to be transparent, because then they would hope the candidate would, or some candidates would, self-select out. Because of that employer transparency, they would realize, oh, wait, I don't think I would be successful here, so I'm not going to pursue this role, or I'm not going to accept this offer. What it doesn't protect the employer from is being transparent and open, and then having the candidate not self-select out, even though they should, because, maybe they don't have any other offers, or maybe they, are inaccurately assessing their own capabilities. So that northwest quadrant is the candidates playing the field, the employer's trying to do the right thing. Candidate would get lots of offers, and the employer can get good match, or they could get terrible matches if the candidate doesn't self-select appropriately. And then let's go now to the southwest quadrant, which is low employer transparency and low candidate transparency. And in this case, this is one of those where it's summarized as chat roulette. It's like, you're rolling the dice. The employer's not being very direct and honest about what, their company is. And then the candidate is also not being super upfront about what they're good and not good at. So, like I said, with this one, you are basically neither party knows what they're getting into, and maybe sometimes it can work out. Maybe it's like the one night stand, and who knows? Like, maybe they end up getting married and everything works out. But I would not recommend that as a combination. And then you've got the southeast quadrant, where the candidate is being very, very transparent, but the employer is kind of like being selectively transparent. And in this case, you've got the candidate providing the full kind of a self-assessment and all the details, what's working, what they're good at, not good at, where they struggle, yada, yada. The employer then is sharing only what's good about the company and the role. And in this case, you can still get a good outcome. It's not the end of the world. It requires that the employer does the right thing and kind of correctly determines if they want to extend an offer based on their perfect knowledge, because they know everything about the candidate and they know everything about the role and the hiring manager and the division or whatever. And it's kind of, it's similar to the candidate playing the field quadrant, but kind of inverse, where now the candidate has to rely on the employer to self-select candidates in and out based on having more information. And generally that should be good. The risk here is that if the employer has been struggling to fill the role, then they might bring someone in who is basically going to take on more risk than that candidate knows. And it's still in the employer's interest because they're like, wow, this guy is great. This gal is great. We've got all these issues. Let's bring them in and hopefully they can help us out. But let's not tell them about the totality or complexity of the issues. So, key takeaways here are, if you're a job candidate, I think in general, it is better to optimize for lots of transparency about yourself. Now, that is a luxury for some people. If you've got a lot of time and you have a lot of kind of runway and you don't need to work for a while, then I'm all about transparency. Now, I want to be realistic. There are some people that I work with on the coaching side, and they're like, hey, man, I've been out of work for 9 months or over a year. And, I've kind of used up everything in the pantry and I've got to start getting a paycheck again, in which case you wouldn't blame them if they were like, hey, I'm going to really kind of lay out all of my strengths and I'll just kind of bet on myself to work on my weaknesses. I don't really want to give people reasons not to hire me. I could see that. I think hiring managers have often have a good sense though of authenticity. So I still think you should generally be transparent, but I also want to be respectful and sensitive to the fact that, hey, if someone's been out of work for a long time and they don't have a lot of money stocked away, then they may need to optimize for getting a paycheck and getting something. So transparency, generally a good thing. Yes, there are circumstances where maybe a candidate wants to really focus on the positives and maybe not even mention any or most of the negatives. On the employer side, I think the case for transparency is even greater, because even if an employer has been struggling to fill a role, if you bring the wrong person in, it's way, 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 way expensive. It's not only expensive for the hiring manager, but it's expensive for the hired person, their peers, other teams that are dependent on them. If it's a manager, their direct reports. So the error costs of a poor hire for a company, especially if it's like a smaller company or it's a critical role, is often much greater than the error cost for a job candidate who ended up kind of in a poor match. So TLDR, if you're a candidate and you can afford not to find something for a little while and really look for that great fit, then I'm all for transparency. It means like you may not get as many offers because you're basically giving data to kind of knock you out of contention for some roles. But I would argue like, well, if you're getting knocked out of contention because of the truth, then that might be a good thing. It might be a good thing. There is a nuance there where you could say, well, but wait a minute, if every other candidate is embellishing and I'm the only one being honest, I may never get any offers. Yeah, I suppose you could make that argument, but I think I do think the system in the long run rewards kind of the meritocracy, and hiring managers are smart. They know that no one's perfect, and they'd like to know where you're struggling, where you get energy versus where you lose energy, and what you're amazing at versus what just doesn't come as naturally to you. I think when I'm hiring people, I don't expect them to be perfect. I just want to know, like, okay, but where are you spiking, and does that line up with where I need people on our team, and is that going to set you up for success? So candidates generally, I think, very often the case should be for maximum transparency. On the employer side, it is tempting to kind of really sell the role and sell the company, but in the long run, it'll be very expensive to have hires that don't work out. So let me know in the comments below what you think about the candidate's dilemma. Am I being too sort of idealistic about saying, hey, everybody should be fully transparent? Or do you agree? Have you had friends or yourself experience cases where you've been in another quadrant, and how did it work out? So till next episode, Thanks for tuning in. See ya.